So today I'm here to talk to you about how honeybees interact with natural areas and native bees. I'm going to give you a brief overview of pollinators and introduction to native bees, and then talk about some of the issues in natural areas as we talk about potentially pasturing honeybees in some of these natural areas. What are the issues that could come up? And then after I'm done with that, I'm going to share with you some recommendations for natural areas land managers that we've come up with. We're here because pollinators are important. 85% of the flowering plants on the planet require an animal, and usually that animal is an insect, and usually that insect is a bee for pollination. So the majority of our plant diversity is dependent on pollinators. And the same is true for the food that we eat. 1 out of 3 bites of food that we put into our body comes from a plant that was pollinated by a bee. Our conclusions at this point, after looking through the research, and when I say our conclusions, I'm speaking for the Xerces Society at this point. This is the conclusion that we came up with in our paper that looks at the overview of the potential impacts. We says, because of the potential threats to our native pollinators, until additional evidence exists documenting that honeybees have, at a minimum, a net neutral effect on our native biota, we urge land managers to consider these potential impacts and their relevance when making a decision about the placement of apiaries on public lands and natural areas. So we're really urging at this point the use of the precautionary principle that our natural areas should be refuges for our native bees. And really making sure that any decisions moving forward are compatible with natural lands management decisions, not just in the short term, but in the long term.
I'd like to take the opportunity to dive a little deeper, working off of some of the great background information that Rich provided, into specifically the question of competition and interactions between managed honeybees and wild native bees. So when you have, there's this innate potential for competitive interactions between honeybees and native bees because, or rather unmanaged bees, because honeybees and wild bees both require the exact same resource, nectar and pollen from flowers, for their daily activities and their reproduction. So there's this inherent potential for competition. So the management challenge also is sustaining wild and native bees. Following up on what Rich mentioned, there is a huge diversity of native bee species in the United States, more than 3,600 species. They're the key pollinators of wildland plants. They support ecosystem services. They also have these unique patterns of spatiotemporal occurrence. The status is unknown for most, although there are documented trends of decline noted, and there are species that are listed as threatened or endangered. Some native pollinators are used as managed species in agriculture. It's a small list, but it is one way that they're being used. So you have managed blue orchard bees, alfalfa leaf cutting bees, a couple bumblebee species. As a summary of the findings, I just wanted to drive home the point that the results from foraging data very much appear equivocal. A lot of the larger review papers that have looked at this sort of pattern have found that it's inconsistent. We really can't say if there is or is not an impact of competition. But a much more consistent trend starts to emerge when the fitness of bees is assessed. So native bees versus honeybees.